So this is the face of a car guy who's finally got a 911 and is driving it for the first time. So this is my 2001 Carrera 4. I just bought it. It has 51,000 miles on the odometer. In recent years, it's only been driven maybe 1,000 or 2,000 miles a year. It's been well maintained, but because of the low mileage and the model year and everything I read on internet, I thought the only smart thing to do was to change the IMS bearing before I even drive it. So today we tackle the famous IMS bearing job. What that means is we're gonna have to drop the transmission out of the car. First step, jacking it up really high. Second step, for safety, we're going to unplug the battery because we'll be working next to some electrical components and we want to make sure that there's no risk of damage to ourselves or the vehicle. Today what we did is we jacked it up as high as we could and we disconnected the negative battery terminal. We then got under the vehicle and removed the underbody shield so that we could have access to the transmission. We took off an aluminum sway bar that was down here. And then we disconnected the CV boots from the transmission. The CV boots right here. Transmission's right here. And we disconnected the gear shifter linkage and the slave cylinder, which is above the transmission. You can't see it from here. It was hard to get to, but with a 4-inch extension, we used the 13mm socket and got those off. There were 2 bolts up there. And so next we're going to be disconnecting the transmission from the engine and then the transmission mounts that are right up here. We got the transmission out of the car. It took a while because one of the bolts holding the transmission to the crankcase on the very top is almost invisible because it's so hidden. So it was keeping everything connected and we're having a hard time getting it. But here we are, the pressure plate and the clutch right behind it. And so we're almost ready to take off the pressure plate and then the flywheel. Right, so we got the transmission out of the car. It's looking really good, nice and clean. Came off easily once we got all the bolts off. We supported the engine with a jack, and now it's on 2 jack stands. And got to the clutch now, and it's remarkably clean. It doesn't look worn hardly at all. I received the IMS retrofit toolkit to pull to extract the old bearing and put in the new one. I've got the bearing itself right here, which I'm gonna go put outside for a few hours to shrink it. Apparently that's something that has been a long known trick for installing wheel bearings, and apparently it works well for this. So you shrink the bearing a little bit by getting it cold. Here it is, the dual row bearing. My car's a 2001 and it has the dual row bearing. After dropping the transmission, taking off the flywheel, we were able to verify that. So fortunately it's a very cold day today, minus 17, which must be about close to minus 30 Fahrenheit. So I'll put this outside for a few hours here. When we're ready to install it, it should go in nicely. So I've got the service manual and I've got the Pelican parts manual that's also a good description. I've read those thoroughly and I'm ready to do this. So first step is drain the oil. Here we go. I'm actually reaching the objective, which is remove the IMS bearing, and that's what I'm about to do now. This morning what I started with was removing the camshaft bore plugs. There's one up there, there's 2 over here, and 2 in the back. Put the engine at top dead center and lock the camshaft on the other side of this here towards the back. And then came down here and loosened these coolant hoses in order to then remove the timing chain tensioner. There's one here and one here. You can see it's still dripping. I should specify that prior to doing that, I locked the cam with the special cam locking tool. It's hard to see, but it's over in this corner over here. So that's holding the cam in the head right there to keep the timing of the engine from moving after I remove the IMS bearing here. So there it is. No play. No play on the center nut. It looks absolutely fine. No oil leaking out. I wonder if it was changed before. It's crazy. Look, it's got the more recent flange. I don't know when that was changed to, but that brown grommet is the newer kind, so it may have been changed before. In any case, it wasn't that hard to pry off this flange. Look at that. Seal doesn't even seem damaged in any way. Well, I guess it's better than finding it damaged, but it still kind of feels like I did all this for nothing. Anyway, I've just removed the IMS bearing. This is what it's looking like. Both seals seem fine. The oil that came out was clean, doesn't smell awful. There's no play in the bearing itself, in the stud. There's no grit, you know, it turns smoothly. Everything feels really good. And this is after removing it from the car, which takes a considerable amount of force. So all in all, I think this bearing would have been fine for a long time still. Of course, I haven't opened it up, but just by looking at it, you really get the sense that there's nothing wrong with it. It does seem like a lot of trouble and a lot of expense to change something that was, you know, in all appearances, absolutely fine. But at least now I get to enjoy the car without any worries, so I'm glad I'm doing it. The new bearing is in. The retaining clip is in. It's nice and straight. Everything turns well. It's nice and clean. There's no grime in there. I'm going to put the cover on. The new flange is on. Just need to torque the nuts down. I'm just going to verify the specifications. I think it's 10 Newton meters, but I'm going to double check. And then I'll be putting the center nut on with some sealant, and the IMS retrofit will be complete. Alright, rear main seal is now off. The only other major thing we had to do while we were back. So this is my Porsche special tool that I made out of a 3-inch pipe that I picked up at the hardware store for a few dollars. And it's helping me ensure that I'm putting on the rear main seal evenly. So I'm basically doing each bolt 90 degrees at a time. And that way I'm getting it evenly in, and I will stop when it's recessed by about 4 millimeters. So that's the plan. Alright, so the rear main seal is in. It's recessed about 4 millimeters from the crankcase here all the way around. It does look about like it was before taking it off, and it wasn't leaking, so I think it's fine. I'm hesitating about whether or not to put some sealant around the outside. Of course, you don't want to put it around the inside where the crank is spinning, where the crankshaft is spinning, but at least here along the outside, I think just as a precaution I could put it. I don't see how it could do any harm. So I think I might do that. It went in well. My tool worked well. I pulled it in, a quarter turn at a time, and it went in evenly, and so it's looking really good. I'm confident that it's not going to leak. The flywheel's torqued on. Went around and got everything at 25 Newton meters, and then added 120 degrees to that. So got my little flywheel lock here that I made. I couldn't get a bolt that was long enough and narrow enough to fit through it, so I just used some tie wraps. I used the biggest ones I had, about 7 of them. That's holding it fine into this bolt. And so then I marked with a little Sharpie on each of these bolts and on the flywheel a 90-degree mark, and then I got to 90 and I knew I only had to do 30 more to get to 120, so that's what I did here. So they're all evenly torqued on, really tight. That is not coming off. So next we put on the clutch. New clutch is on. Just torquing on the pressure plate. And we will be just about ready to put the transmission back on. Brand new clutch, brand new pressure plate, resurfaced flywheel, new bolts everywhere, all around, on the flywheel, on the pressure plate. Everything's nicely centered with the clutch centering tool. We are ready to hoist up the transmission and plug it back in. New throwout bearing, new spring, new bushing behind the clutch release lever here. So everything's back in place, it's clean, and we're ready to go. All right, we're getting ready to put the transmission back in the car. Just placing it on the jack. I'm gonna go get some help now. Not really a time to be doing something alone. This could be kind of dangerous if it falls on me. I don't know how much it weighs, but it's probably close to 200 pounds. So that clean new piece is new slave cylinder. I'm almost ready to put it on. I just got to get the transmission a little bit closer to its actual position, and then that should be able to slide in and be bolted on. And so we're just gonna balance the transmission on this piece of wood on the jack that's underneath, and raise it into place. And then the tricky part is aligning it with that pressure plate, and to get the spline of the transmission through the pressure plate, through the clutch, into the flywheel. So let's see if we can do it. All right, the transmission is back in the car. We managed to match it up with the crankcase. I don't know if you can actually see, but right up there is the crankcase here and the transmission there. The gap is closed. I can just push it closed like that with my hand now. So all I got to do is put the bolts in and torque them. We had two jacks, one supporting the engine and one supporting the transmission. So this one's supporting the engine here, and this one's supporting the transmission. And Thomas, my son, was controlling those. I was telling him up, down, and I was under the car pushing and pulling and tilting the transmission and lining things up. It was tough. It took us over an hour, but we finally got it.
You're so bad at drawing them.
Got you on video, Sophia.
Doing what? A smiley face? Yeah, I did a smiley face.
That's it.
So this is what I call a well-deserved beer. Project IMS and clutch and rear main seal is complete. And basically new clutch parts. Then I put the transmission back under the car. With Tommy's help, we raised it up and plugged it back in, screwed it back onto the crankcase, reattached both CV joints to the wheels in the back, reattached the drive shaft to the front, put the transmission supports back in, put new oil in it, new filter, put the underbody shields back on, the sway bar, put a new slave cylinder, bled the clutch system, and now we are ready to circulate the oil and then subsequently start it. So wish us luck.